Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Friday, March 8, 2024. The day after his State of the Union address, President Joe Biden heads to the Philadelphia area to promote his themes and proposals from his speech on the economy, reproductive rights, foreign affairs, and more. Republican National Committee elects new leadership at its meeting in Houston, Texas. Leadership supported by likely Republican presidential nominee and former President Donald Trump. Michael Whatley becomes chair, and Lara Trump, Donald Trump's daughter-in-law, is co-chair. We'll hear the two talking about getting out the vote, securing the integrity of the ballot, and raising money. The Senate has until midnight to pass a $467 billion six-bill spending package for fiscal year 2024, or there will be a partial government shutdown. The bill funds the Departments of Veterans Affairs, Commerce, Housing and Urban Development, and Agriculture. The House passes a bill the Republican sponsors say will increase investor capital for small businesses and entrepreneurs. Pentagon Press Secretary talks about President Biden's plan to build a temporary pier off the coast of Gaza to get more humanitarian aid quickly to the Palestinians suffering in the war between Israel and Hamas. Pentagon also releases a report on UAPs, sometimes known as UFOs. And on daylight saving time, some senators are still pushing their bill to end the twice-a-year clock switching. Story from USA Today, U.S. employers added a robust 275,000 jobs in February as hiring stayed strong despite high interest rates, persistent inflation, and uncertainty about the economic outlook in a presidential election year. The unemployment rate rose from 3.7% to 3.9%, highest since January 2022. From the Labor Department. President Biden putting out a statement, the great American comeback continues. Last night I put forward my vision for America's future, one where we build the economy from the middle out and the bottom up, where we invest in all Americans and where the middle class has a fair shot and we leave no one behind. 3 years ago I inherited an economy on the brink. Now our economy is the envy of the world. And then he notes we added the 275,000 jobs last month, nearly 15 million since I took office. Unemployment has been under 4% for the longest stretch in more than 50 years. Wages keep going up. Inflation keeps coming down. That part of the statement from President Biden. As he was making his way up to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania on Air Force One to speak about his re-election campaign, the White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre spoke to reporters.
I wanted to talk about the State of the Union last night. President Biden hit a grand slam, making a strong case to the American people about the future and his vision for an economy that's centered on the middle class, for protecting our freedoms instead of taking them away, and for making us more secure by acting on the bipartisan border deal and strengthening our alliances. Not a dark division based on dragging America into the past, on passing extreme abortion bans, on an economy by the rich for the rich, on taking revenge and bowing down to dictators. His vision connected, as we keep seeing in front pages across the country and in live reactions you all have captured. Now we're taking it on the road. As you can see, I want to share some of the reactions that stood out to us. Presidential historian Michael Beschloss, he said, Biden hit the ball out of the park tonight. Senator and Reverend Raphael Warnock, that was a sermon tonight. Political playbook. It's hard to imagine how the State of the Union could have gone much better for Biden. Larry Sabato, yeah, it's a home run. Ian Remmer, a good night for American democracy. Newsweek, Republicans complained Joe Biden had too much energy at the State of the Union. And coming out of the State of the Union, the president, his cabinet, and senior administration officials will fan out across the country to speak directly to the American people, underscoring the historic progress we have made thanks to the president's agenda, as well as the clear contrast between competing visions for the country.
The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre with reporters on Air Force One. Biden-Harris 2024 campaign co-chair Mitch Landrieu telling CNN today that President Biden should not have used the word illegal to refer to the man from Venezuela charged in the murder of college student Laken Riley. Mitch Landrieu saying he probably should have used a different word, and I think he would know that. But what you should notice is that he made a small mistake. The big thing that he did right, and this is what the president always does, is express empathy to people. Congresswoman Delia Ramirez, Democrat from Illinois, live posted on X, "No human being is illegal," during the president's speech. More from Karine Jean-Pierre. She got asked about this.
From last night's State of the Union, from the rostrum, the president had an exchange with Marjorie Taylor Greene about Laken Riley, and he used the word illegal and then later legals. And I was wondering if you could clarify what he was trying to communicate.
So I think he was obviously asked about this right before getting on Air Force One. There's a couple things I do want to lay out, which I think is important when you look at the entirety of what he said yesterday in his remarks. The president spoke to the nation, obviously, last night very clearly about not demonizing immigrants. He talked about the story of our country and families seeking safety and opportunity in a place of possibilities. President Biden believes in treating everyone humanely, which is why he stopped his predecessors' anti-immigration policies, as you know, all know and have covered back in the last administration. That is really an important message that he wanted to make sure was sent during the State of the Union. In response to what was hurled at him from the House floor, the president made clear that the murder of Laken Hope Riley was horrific and expressed sympathy for her family. And he once again called on congressional Republicans to stop blocking the toughest, fairest, bipartisan border security legislation in modern history. Again, he was responding to what was being hurled at him, as you all covered, and he was responding to that moment and that exchange.
White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre with reporters on Air Force One as they all flew from Washington to the Philadelphia area where President Biden was holding a campaign event. In Washington, on the House floor, Congressman Nick Langworthy, Republican from New York, talked about the president's State of the Union address.
In his State of the Union address last night, President Biden chose to give a divisive campaign speech instead of bringing Americans together with a hopeful vision for the future. He completely failed to take ownership of his disastrous border policies and weak leadership, and instead tried to pass the blame on House Republicans. President Biden tried to pass the blame for the border crisis he created by executive order, pushed for legislation that would codify his bad policies, and failed to mention that House Republicans passed H.R. 2, the strongest border bill in history, that has been sitting in the Senate on Chuck Schumer's desk since last May. Last night, President Biden claimed that we have the best economy in the world. The American people aren't buying that lie. They have to pay for Biden's inflationary policies every single day, from groceries to gas to energy bills and housing. The American dream is unaffordable under President Joe Biden. He single-handedly created the crisis at our borders. He crushed our economy, crippled the American energy sector, plunged us deeper into debt, and enabled violent crime in our major cities and made it harder to raise a family or own a business in the United States. Americans deserve a better leader than Joe Biden. And I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
Congressman Nick Langworthy, Republican from New York, today on the House floor. Story from CNN, more than 6 in 10 Americans who watched President Joe Biden's State of the Union address had a positive reaction to the speech, according to a CNN poll conducted by SSRS, with a smaller 35% reacting very positively. Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, the House Minority Leader, held his weekly news conference today and had a very short assessment of the President's State of the Union address.
Smoking Joe Biden was on fire during the State of the Union address. He was lit, delivered a compelling vision for the American people, and crushed MAGA extremism. Questions?
Congressman Jeffries at his news conference, he was asked about the attendance at Thursday night's State of the Union address of former Congressman George Santos, Republican from New York, who was expelled from Congress in December and faces federal charges of defrauding campaign donors.
It's kind of an extraordinary thing that this guy won't go away. But it's indicative of the reality that there's a clear choice in terms of what the American people face between Democrats and Republicans, between a vision that President Biden laid out to move America forward and build an economy that's healthy and that puts working families middle-class families and those who aspire to be part of the middle class first, as compared to the extreme MAGA Republicans who want to turn back the clock and stick us with massive tax cuts for the wealthy, the well-off, and the well-connected. Marjorie Taylor Greene and George Santos are running the House Republican Conference. And at this point, it's Marjorie Taylor Greene on the inside and Santos on the outside, but clearly he's trying to come back. Now, here's the choice that the American people are going to face over the next few months. Team normal versus team chaos. Team reasonable versus team dysfunction. And team get stuff done versus team extreme. Team Biden versus team Marjorie Taylor Greene and George Santos. And that's a clear choice for the American people.
The House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, at his news conference today on Capitol Hill. And George Santos announced that he is now running for Congress again, saying on X that he will challenge Republican Nick LaLota in New York's 1st Congressional District. George Santos writes, New York hasn't had a real conservative represent them since I left office arbitrarily thanks to rhino empty suits like Nick LaLota. He is willing to risk the future of our majority and the future of this country for his own political gain. TheHill.com had reported this week that House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, told House Republicans in a closed-door meeting that decorum is the order of the day when it comes to the State of the Union address. And there were times during President Biden's speech when Republican members did shout things out, going back and forth with the president. One was Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia. She also drew attention for wearing a MAGA hat. After the speech, she went on Right Side Broadcasting Network to talk about it.
When I put on this hat, every Democrat in the area sitting around me, and I was sitting right next to the center aisle, so they were everywhere. They all started yelling at me.
What were they saying? Could you understand what they were saying to you?
Well, a lot of it I couldn't understand because so many were yelling at me at the same time. But one of them was complaining about me wearing a hat, and we're not supposed to wear hats on the House floor. And I said, I'll pay the fine. I'll pay the fine.
What do you think that fine costs?
Well, I don't know, but I do know that I paid over $100,000 in fines last Congress because Nancy Pelosi fined me every single time I walked on the House floor because I refused to wear a mask. And so it could be anywhere like $2,500. I'm not sure, okay. $5,000.
And you don't care.
10,000.
You knew that going in that you would.
I'll pay the fine, but here's what offended me. Here's what I found to be outrageous. Is Sergeant at Arms came up and told me that I needed to take the hat off. And I said, I'm not taking the hat off. I refused to take it off. And he said, well, it's decorum. I said, I certainly understand. You do what you need to do. I'll pay a fine. I'll do whatever, a warning, whatever there is. But I'm not taking the hat off. And he said, well, you're going to have to leave or we're going to take you out. And I was like, you can haul me out of here. Go ahead and try it, but I'm not taking this hat off. And I told him, I'm elected by my district. This is the people's house. I will wear this hat. I will wear it here in the House floor because my district supports President Trump, supports Make America Great Again policies, and supports me wearing this hat. I'm not taking it off, and I'm not leaving.
Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, Republican from Georgia, on Right Side Broadcasting Network Thursday night after the president's State of the Union address. Today, Congressman Whatley Nickel, Democrat from North Carolina, spoke on the House floor about what he saw as a lack of decorum from some members.
When you get elected to Congress, you have a choice to make. You can work hard on legislation, you can work hard to build relationships across the aisle and get things done, or you can go join the circus. And too many of my colleagues choose the later, to join the circus, to engage in performative politics. And Mr. Speaker, last night the clown show was on full display by the House Republican Conference, continually interrupting, disrupting the president. Mr. Speaker, in my time here, I have voted for Speaker 19 times. I have voted for 4 continuing resolutions. I see a House Republican conference totally incapable of governing and totally incapable of keeping the clowns in check. The yelling, the screaming at the president was shameful. It was a disgrace. In 2009, Joe Wilson yelled at President Obama and said, "You lie," and the cat came out of the bag. And what happened last night was absolutely unacceptable. We need to do so much better. We deserve so much better for the United States of America.
The gentleman's time has expired.
We need to restore civility, decency, and respect to the United States Congress. I yield back.
Congressman Whatley Nickel, Democrat from North Carolina, today on the House floor. There's a story at the Hill. Congressman Mark Pocan, Democrat of Wisconsin, is demanding an apology from his fellow Wisconsin Congressman Derek Van Orden, a Republican, following Van Orden's outburst at Thursday's State of the Union address. The outburst came as Biden spoke critically of former President Trump's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic while addressing the joint session of Congress, arguing that Trump failed the most basic presidential duty that he owes to the American people, the duty to care. Lies, Van Orden yelled in response. Pocan released a statement Friday morning saying Van Orden continues to embarrass Wisconsin and Congress. He called on the first-term lawmaker to formally apologize to Biden for the outburst. That from the Hill. This is Washington Today. The Washington Post reporting from Houston. Former President Donald Trump, who is again likely to be the Republican nominee, commenced a fresh overhaul of the party's Central Committee as it seeks to make up a fundraising gap and reverse the party's disappointments in recent elections. The Republican National Committee formally elected Trump's choices of Michael Whatley and Lara Trump, the former president's daughter-in-law, who was accompanied at the meeting by her husband Eric, as its 2 highest-ranking officers at a meeting here Friday. The RNC's operations will be run by a top advisor to Trump's campaign, Chris LaCivita. Whatley, who chaired the North Carolina GOP, has long been outspoken about allegations of voter fraud. He was a member of George W. Bush's legal team during the 2000 recount. After being elected Friday by a unanimous voice vote, Whatley pledged to expand efforts to deploy poll watchers, workers, and judges as real-time monitors wherever ballots are cast and counted. That was from the Washington Post. Here's part of Michael Whatley's speech.
Everyone in this room and every voter across the country knows that we must protect the sanctity of their vote. As your general counsel, I have worked closely with Chairwoman McDaniel to build our election integrity program from scratch. We have hired attorneys across the country. We've already filed more than 75 lawsuits in 23 states and are working closely with state legislators and election regulators to ensure that state laws, rules, and regulations will ensure fair, accurate, secure, and transparent elections. We have also hired and placed election integrity directors in battleground states who are already recruiting and training tens of thousands of volunteers to serve as poll judges, workers, and observers who will act as real-time monitors whenever votes are being cast and counted. And we will do more. If our voters don't have confidence that our elections are safe and secure, nothing else matters. We will work relentlessly in every state to ensure that it is easy to vote and hard to cheat. Over the next 8 months, the RNC will work hand in glove with President Trump's campaign to deliver on these core missions. If a dollar that we have is not directed towards winning this November, that dollar will not be spent. If a proposal or a request comes to us that is not focused on winning in November, it will not be considered. From now until November 5th, we have an incredible amount of work to do in order to deliver the votes to return Donald Trump to the White House, flip the Senate, and expand our majority in the House of Representatives. I know that this committee is ready to roll up our sleeves and get to work.
Michael Whatley at the RNC spring meeting in Houston after being elected the chair of the Republican National Committee, replacing Ronna McDaniel, who resigned today after leading the RNC for 7 years. And they also elected Lara Trump, Donald Trump's daughter-in-law, as co-chair.
This isn't just about right versus left, Republican versus Democrat. It's about good versus evil. It's about bringing this country back, and it's about giving this country back to we, the people, right? That's the goal. And you know the vision. You know what we have to do. Michael's talked about it. We are going to make sure that every single penny of every dollar raised goes towards one goal, which is winning. How do we do that? We have to have election integrity like we've never seen before in this country, right? We've got to play the game a little bit differently. We have to encourage people to do things like early voting. We have to get people early voting, and then as soon as they go vote, they take people from that day on all the way up until Election Day to go vote. We have to raise a lot of money, and I have great news. I brought this up here today because I wanted everyone to know that already I have a check for the Republican National Committee for $100,000 that has been donated as of today, as of these nominations going through. Yeah, we're starting today, folks.
Lara Trump, after being elected RNC co-chair at the RNC meeting in Houston. From Reuters here in Washington, the U.S. Senate convened on Friday to pass legislation that would fund several federal agencies through September and avert a partial government shutdown that otherwise would begin at midnight. The legislation would provide funding for agriculture, transportation, housing, energy, veterans, and other programs through the end of the fiscal year on September 30th. It passed the Republican-controlled House of Representatives earlier this week, though the chamber is expected to pass the bill and send it on to Democratic President Joe Biden to sign into law. It's unclear when a vote will take place. That was the reporting from Reuters. The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, opened the Senate session.
Well, we have until tonight for the Senate to send an appropriations package to the president, or else the government will begin to shut down. For the information of senators, we're going to hold a live quorum call in a few moments, and we will vote on cloture at approximately noon. I hope my Republican colleagues will work with us on a reasonable agreement so we can get this funding package done today and send it to the president's desk before a shutdown.
The Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York. The six-bill fiscal year 2024 spending package is a total of $467.5 billion. Senator Rand Paul, Republican of Kentucky, spoke about his opposition to the bill.
The senators from Pennsylvania stuck an earmark in here for an organization that has public sex parties with whomever, whenever, groups, no numbers, in a public forum. That's what your money is going for. The senators from Pennsylvania put an earmark in here for public sex parties. Really? Does anybody think that that's in the general welfare? Does anybody not see our founding fathers rolling over in their graves that Democrat senators from Pennsylvania wanted to fund sex parties in Philadelphia? There's nothing in the Constitution that allows that. They also want to fund environmental justice centers, whatever that means, hell-bent on banning gas stoves. Really? The bill has 6,000 earmarks, over $12 billion in spending. So this is the cusp of it, but the overall spending is hundreds of billions of dollars, and the spending at this rate will lead to $1.5 trillion borrowed. What happens to the borrowing? The Federal Reserve buys it and your prices go up at the store. Why does a steak cost $20 in the grocery store now? Because they've diluted the value of our currency by all these earmarks, all this giving, and all this unconstitutional spending.
Senator Rand Paul, Republican from Kentucky, on the Senate floor today. The senators are still trying to come to a deal on what Republican amendments will be allowed to be offered in exchange for Republicans not using all the available debate time and procedural hurdles, which, if they did use them, would mean final passage would probably not occur before tonight's deadline, midnight Eastern, when funding authorization expires for the programs in this six-bill package, and a partial government shutdown could start. Wall Street today, the Dow down 68, NASDAQ down 188, S&P down 33. Washington today continues in a moment.
Hi, it's Nate from C-SPAN. Imagine, 45 years ago when there were just a handful of television networks, C-SPAN first went on the air, bringing an unfiltered view of government directly to America's living rooms. No spin, no commentary, just pure democracy in action.
And it's Shannon from C-SPAN. It was a bold experiment. We finally had a front row seat to Congress, the White House, and the campaign trail, all without government funding.
As we celebrate 45 years and a legacy of unfiltered access, we ask for your support of a donation in honor of over 4 decades of service. Your gift, no matter how big or small, will help maintain this vital resource for access to the democratic process.
You can help ensure another 45 years of witnessing history unfold and empowering citizens to be informed and engaged in the political process. Visit cspan.org/donate today and join our 45th anniversary campaign.
Thank you for supporting C-SPAN, your unfiltered view of government. Visit cspan.org/donate today to make your gift of support. Thank you.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you find your podcasts. The site crowdfundinsider.com has a story. After several days of debate and discussion, the U.S. House of Representatives has approved the legislation Expanding Access to Capital Act. The bill was sponsored by Representative Patrick McHenry, the chair of the House Financial Services Committee, an individual who has long supported small businesses and small investors, and a key voice advocating on behalf of the investment crowdfunding sector. The legislation passed 212 to 205, with voting split across party lines. That was from crowdfundinsider.com. Here's some of the House floor debate. Congresswoman Ann Wagner, Republican from Missouri, in favor.
As chair of the Capital Markets Subcommittee, I am so proud of the hard work from our members in crafting this landmark piece of legislation that supports America's Main Street businesses and retail investors. I am also grateful to leadership for affirming that this bill is a crucial priority and taking action to pass this legislation in the House today. This legislation is a culmination of 4 hearings that the Capital Markets Subcommittee has held this Congress, where we have heard powerful testimony from 19 witnesses, including founders of both private and public companies, investors of all sizes, former SEC commissioners, securities law practitioners, and even one of the authors of the IPO-related provisions of the Jobs Act. As the witnesses at each of these hearings made clear, all of the bills included in H.R. 2799 play a vital role in strengthening our public markets, improving access to capital for small businesses and entrepreneurs, and expanding investment opportunities for all Americans. For example, Representative Stiles' Helping Startups Continue to Grow Act strengthens our public markets, making them more attractive by allowing more companies to benefit from emerging growth company status. Representative Stiles' bill also extends the maximum amount of time an issuer can remain an emerging growth company, helping to right-size the regulatory burdens on newly public companies that are working to achieve their potential. This common sense provision builds on one of the most successful and impactful reforms from the Jobs Act of 2012. Representative Houchin's Regulation A+ Improvement Act improves access to capital for small businesses by increasing the amount that small companies can raise under Regulation A from $50 million to $150 million without being subject to burdensome IPO compliance requirements. In making this adjustment, Regulation A will become a more attractive pathway for small businesses to raise capital. Our committee's legislation also expands investment opportunities for all Americans by revising the accredited investor definition to include individuals receiving investment advice on a private offering from a qualified accredited investor.
Congresswoman Ann Wagner, Republican from Missouri, on the House floor. Congresswoman Nydia Velázquez, Democrat from New York, opposed this bill.
As ranking member of the House Small Business Committee, I know that small businesses are the driving force of the American economy. Access to capital is the lifeblood of our nation's small firms. It is what allows them to expand and hire more workers. A key method for small businesses to raise capital is seeking investors through our nation's capital markets. It is a method I support, but raising funds through capital markets cannot come at the expense of retail investors, employees, and independent contracts. This bill fails to strike an appropriate balance and significantly weakens investor protections while dramatically expanding the number of exempt offerings. When we created new exemptions in the Jobs Act, they were designed for smaller firms. But today, large private companies and private equity funds have misused these exemptions to create an opaque lending market that is now bigger than our public markets. The lack of transparency associated with these funds isn't beneficial for small businesses seeking financing from these funds or retail investors investing in them. Private securities offerings are generally deemed as riskier than public offerings. The lack of disclosures and transparency in this bill allows retail investors to participate in these offerings without adequately understanding the dangers, creating the potential for significant financial loss for working-class investors and retirees. President Biden has already signaled his opposition to this bill. If the majority was serious about helping small businesses raise capital through our private markets, they will pull this bill and work with us to craft a bipartisan solution that helps small businesses and protect investors.
Congresswoman Nydia Velasquez, Democrat from New York, on the House floor. Again, the bill passed by a vote of 212 to 205, now goes to the Senate. From CNN, House lawmakers are moving with dizzying speed with a plan that could ban TikTok from the United States. In the span of 2 days this week, a key House committee introduced and approved a bill targeting TikTok. The full House is set to vote on it as early as next week, and the White House says President Joe Biden is prepared to sign it. If enacted, the bill would give TikTok roughly 5 months to separate from its China-linked parent company ByteDance, or else app stores in the United States will be prohibited from hosting the app on their platforms. That was from CNN. TikTok, the video-sharing app, is used by 170 million Americans, more than half the country. Congressman Kevin Hern, Republican from Oklahoma, spoke about this bill and the committee vote at the Hudson Institute with its senior fellow, Rebecca Heinrichs.
First thing we need to dispel is we're not here to ban TikTok. That's not what we do in America. What we're trying to do is protect America and Americans from sometimes their own selves. As we saw last year when the CEO of ByteDance came and testified to Congress, I think one of the most poignant questions that was asked of him was, do you allow the same data gathering or the same techniques to be used in China as you do in the United States? And his response was sort of stuttering and saying no. And then the follow-up question to that was, so you have the algorithms in place to turn this off or leave it on? And certainly he didn't either acknowledge or deny, but we know he did. And so what we're saying with TikTok is China, by statute of Congress in 2020, China is one of the 5 adversarial nations. And if China, who owns directly ByteDance or indirectly, however you want to call it, pretty much own every company in China, is going to use that medium, TikTok, to collect data on American citizens and companies, we're not going to have a part of that. And that's what this bill is about. It's a bipartisan bill. I want to give a big shout out to the former speaker. Speaker McCarthy tried to get this China task force put together in 2019, and then Speaker Pelosi would not do it. And so when he became Speaker of the House last year, he put this together, and it's very bipartisan, led by Mike Gallagher, and the work they're doing is really good.
And just so we're clear, just on the facts, so TikTok, it's owned by ByteDance, which is then controlled by the CCP. So the legislation just requires ByteDance to divest of its control from the CCP, and it can go to any other as long as it's a non-adversary entity controlling the app.
Well, what we're looking at is a 20% threshold, so they can own 20%. Obviously, they lose control of the company at that point in time. So what you're hearing from ByteDance is that their words is essentially you're wanting TikTok out of the nation, out of the United States. If that's what you believe, then you must be doing something nefarious with the data that you're getting, because you are gathering data.
Right. And then interestingly, so the bill passed out of committee completely unanimously, I think 50-0. And then the TikTok app even used sort of through its algorithms, and then had like a button there for young people who were using the app to put in their area code, and then it would give them the congressman to call to lobby against this particular legislation, which really shows how this could be used not just for economic benefit for China, but imagine in the case where China wants to invade Taiwan, really could push out information to young people saying it's the United States that's destabilizing the situation. It could really misinform and galvanize support against U.S. interests.
Well, certainly, if you look at what they're doing as far as some of the hashtags they have and the things they're doing to mine data, and you look at their unbelievable growth in the last 10 years, I think they came out in 2012, you look at the unbelievable growth that they've had as compared to our domestic companies, and with the power they have. We're not here to try to bring parity between the platforms. What we're saying is if you're going to be an adversarial nation, and it's just one component of the bill, as you're going to talk about today, small component, but it is a data collection device, one of many that they have in our ports and in our electric vehicles that they're putting forth. We're going to do everything to address each one of these.
Congressman Kevin Hern, Republican from Oklahoma, with Rebecca Heinrichs, Hudson Institute Keystone Defense Initiative Director and Senior Fellow at a Hudson Institute program today in Washington. A Reuters story says the American Civil Liberties Union said the bill in the U.S. House that would force Chinese-based ByteDance to divest short video app TikTok or face a U.S. ban is unconstitutional. The group cited a November ruling from a U.S. judge that blocked Montana's state ban on free speech grounds. From NBC News, prominent aid organizations dubbed the Biden administration's plans to construct a temporary pier to help the flow of much-needed aid in Gaza as not realistic and a distraction following President Biden's announcement in his State of the Union address last night. The International Committee of the Red Cross continued to call for a sustained ceasefire. Today, the Pentagon, the Press Secretary Pat Ryder, gave more information about this project.
The concept that is being planned involves the presence of U.S. military personnel on military vessels offshore, but does not require U.S. military personnel to go ashore. In terms of security on the ground, we're continuing to plan and coordinate with partners in the region. And as for aid distribution, we'll have more details in the future, but we are coordinating with ally and partner nations, the UN, and humanitarian NGOs on the way ahead for distribution of assistance into Gaza. Finally, in terms of timing, we're working to set this up as quickly as possible, but we expect that it will take several weeks to plan and execute. Once operational, the actual amount of aid delivered will depend on many variables and will likely scale over time. However, we expect that deliveries via JLOTS could provide more than 2 million meals to the citizens of Gaza per day.
The Pentagon Press Secretary Pat Ryder, also an Air Force Major General, opening up his news conference today at the Pentagon. He got many questions about this.
On distribution, who will distribute the aid once it has gone off the causeway or the pier?
Again, as I highlighted at the top, we are talking with allies and partners, the United Nations and other NGOs involved in humanitarian assistance in terms of how that process will work and how that aid will be distributed.
Have you received assurances from the Israelis that they will not fire upon Palestinians as they seek to retrieve the aid?
Look, our focus is on delivering the aid. I'm not going to speak for the Israelis. Obviously, the focus is to make sure that we're going to get the aid. Thank you.
Pentagon Press Secretary Pat Ryder. On a different subject, also at the Pentagon, this from the Washington Post, a lengthy Defense Department review of U.S. government activities related to unidentified anomalous phenomena, more commonly known as UFOs, has found no evidence that extraterrestrial intelligence has visited Earth or that authorities have recovered crashed alien spacecraft and are hiding them from the public. More from Press Secretary Pat Ryder.
Additionally, the department publicly released today the first volume of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office's Historical Record Report, which reviews the record of U.S. government pertaining to unidentified anomalous phenomena, or UAP. In completing this report, AARO reviewed classified and unclassified archives dating back to 1945, conducted dozens of interviews, and partnered with officials across the DoD and the interagency. To date, AARO has found no verifiable evidence for claims that the U.S. government or private companies have access to or have been reverse engineering extraterrestrial technology. AARO has found no evidence that any U.S. government investigation, academic-sponsored research, or official review panel has confirmed that any sighting of a UAP represented extraterrestrial technology. You can read the unclassified version of the Historical Record Report Volume 1 on defense.gov or on the AARO website at aaro.mil.
Pentagon Press Secretary Pat Ryder. Today is International Women's Day, first recognized by the United Nations in 1975. The UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is urging faster action to achieve gender equality, saying billions of women and girls face marginalization, injustice, and discrimination, while the persistent epidemic of violence against women disgraces humanity. U.S. Congresswoman Maxine Waters, Democrat from California, spoke about this today on the House floor.
I rise today, March 8, 2024, to celebrate International Women's Day. 30 years ago, in 1994, at the suggestion of my friend Beata Pozniak, who is with us here today, I introduced H.J. Res. 316 in the House of Representatives to have Congress designate March 8 as the International Women's Day. In this year, 2024, International Women's Day has special importance. Today, as women's rights are under attack, we rededicate ourselves to fight for gender equality, reproductive rights, pay equity, maternal health, and preventing violence against women. The United Nations has selected the theme Inspire Inclusion for International Women's Day in 2024. Here in the House of Representatives, let us inspire women's inclusion and honor women in the United States and around the world. Thank you, Beata.
Congresswoman Maxine Waters, Democrat from California, on the House floor. And finally on Washington today, with the clocks moving ahead 1 hour this weekend. The story from The Hill, Senator Marco Rubio, Republican from Florida, renewed his push to make daylight saving time permanent ahead of this week's time change. Rubio's bill initially passed with unanimous consent in the Senate in March 2022, before later hitting a brick wall in the House. It was reintroduced last year by Rubio as the Sunshine Protection Act of 2023. And Congressman Vern Buchanan, Republican of Florida, introduced companion legislation in the House last March. In a statement Tuesday, Rubio continued his push to eradicate the changing of clocks twice a year. We're springing forward, but should have never fallen back, his statement said. My Sunshine Protection Act would end this stupid practice of changing our clocks back and forth. That was from The Hill. When Senator Rubio's bill passed back in 2022, he was joined in the debate on the Senate floor by Senator Ed Markey, Democrat of Massachusetts.
Seasonal affect disorder is real. And when they get that extra hour of sun in the evening, it helps tens of millions of people all across the country to finally put the winter into a rearview mirror. But let's be honest, spring really starts when we spring forward to daylight saving time. So daylight saving time brings sunshine, smiles, and savings to every person in the country. And more evening sunshine also leads to fewer traffic fatalities, increased economic activity, and more recreation time. From after-work shopping to Little League games and family bike rides, an extra hour of evening sunshine puts a spring in our step and offers a great reason to get outside and enjoy the outdoors. The case for permanent daylight saving time is clear, so let's go from polar to solar. Let's finally make that change in our country, because cutting back on the sun during the fall and winter is a drain on the American people. We must pass the Sunshine Protection Act and make daylight saving time permanent once and for all.
Senator Ed Markey, Democrat from Massachusetts, on the Senate floor in March of 2022, when a bill that he co-sponsored to make daylight saving time permanent did pass the Senate, never got a vote in the House. Senator Markey putting out a statement today with Senator Marco Rubio, Republican of Florida, in support of their bill. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter Word for Word, and you'll get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. Sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night and weekend.